I'm gay. I'm gay. Imagine if you actually introduce yourself like that. Nobody introduces themselves with their sexuality, let's be real. And introducing queer characters into your story is no different. I mean, people don't just like walk up and be like, I'm gay, meet me, I'm the new gay person. So how do we introduce queer characters into our stories? That is what we're going to talk about today. In case you are new to my channel, hello, my name is Bridget. I am a queer writer and filmmaker from Canada, and around here we talk about writing queer stories and all the messiness and baggage that comes along with that. Today we are dealing with character introductions, and this series, as you might be able to tell, or I hope you'll be able to tell from my lovely backdrop, lovely setting, is inspired by coming-of-age movies. And so we're going to be diving into all things character and all things just... Some of them are going to be based around character, and some of them a little bit less, but we are always going to trace back to it. So, yes, we're going to be going with the allegory of a coming-of-age movie, and in this specific video, we're going to be looking at when your characters are introduced into the story. This is when your audience meets your main character, and they begin their little love affair. It's like your audience is the main character, and they're meeting their little love interest. Now, we are going to be looking at 3 options of how you can introduce your queer character. These are going to be ways that you can do it. They're not the only ways, but they are the 3 ways that I could think of while I was writing this script. So let's dive right in. Option 1 is already taken. Now, this option is a pretty easy way to introduce a queer character, although it does have some caveats, as when you're introducing a queer character that's in a relationship, this does not lend itself to queer identities that can be in hetero-presenting relationships. I'm shouting out our bisexuals, our pansexuals, and asexuals who are homoromantic, or no, who are heteroromantic or biromantic or all that fun stuff. So this comes in because for them to be seen by the audience as queer, they need to present in some way as a queer person, like from an outside perspective. They have to, fall into some kind of, either some kind of stereotype, or they have to fall into some kind of like generalized like same-sex pairing. A big example of this is Charlie Spring from Heartstopper. He is introduced when he is in a relationship with Ben Hope. And this is not a functional relationship, but it does give us a very smooth introduction into his sexuality, which also kind of gets underlined by the fact that his background on his phone is gay panic, but that's beside the point. The main way that he is introduced is through his toxic relationship with Ben, and this works very well. When you are looking at doing an already taken introduction, I would encourage you to look at how this relationship will impact the rest of the story. For this, we're going to look at Ballister and Ambrosius from the movie Nimona. And this relationship is very pivotal for the story. It really pushes the plot forward, shows us a lot of who these characters are, and we want to root for them. And through the story, we see Ballister struggle with being away from Ambrosius, and their introduction overall, like the first time we see them, going back to the actual topic of this video, the first time we see them, like apart from the like news introduction of Ballister and Ambrosius, we have a really cute moment where we introduce the relationship between Ballister and Ambrosius. And it's important to remember that both characters in this relationship need to have their own character arcs. And the idea that Ballister and Ambrosius are fighting against their like conditioning around the Institute, and this whole relationship is really what makes the film really cool and interesting and more fun. And in addition, their introductions are not like a big announcement. It's literally like one line. It's Ambrosius putting his hand on Ballister's hand, and that's it. They don't need to necessarily say that they are queer, like, because they're in a queer presenting relationship, and that's enough. So the already taken introduction works really well in this case. Okay, now at the end of each option, we are going to have a set of questions that I encourage you to like write down and brainstorm about as you think about how you want to introduce your queer character into your story. So for this section, here are the questions. Is the relationship your character starts out in healthy? Yeah. Looking at you, Ben Hope. What do the other characters think about their relationship? And lastly, what is the situation of the other character in this pairing? What is their views? What are their outlooks? And all that fun stuff. Dive into both sides of this pairing. Okay, now let's move on to option 2, which is what I'm calling right out of the gate. And that is when you announce who your character is right out of the gate. And a big example of this is the movie Bottoms. This is if you haven't seen it, it's a coming of age movie that's very like, it's a comedy, very like raunchy. And the main characters, PJ and Josie, their introduction is them talking about their crushes. They're talking about the girls that they like in their class and call themselves lesbians. And this is a very on the nose way to go and commonly happens in young adult coming of age movies. It's very, very on the nose, as I said, and really gets the terminology out of the way. So having this happen early on really clears up any ambiguity that we could possibly have about their sexualities and leaves room for the plot to take off. This option can also come in handy with supporting characters, as we see with Elle Argent's character in Heartstopper when her trans identity is brought up in conversation with Tao, Isaac, and Charlie. I almost said Elle, even though she's like the one in conversation. And this becomes more natural when you have other characters that are also queer or like allies. I'm an ally. It is a lot easier when it is around other queer people, and the topic of conversation comes up more often. The dark side of this type is when a character is tokenized. And I am looking at you, Riverdale. I'm looking at the gay best friend trope and just saying, ooh, yeah, there's the one gay kid. Having it be right out of the gate is helpful in some cases to set the stage, but it also needs to be handled with care in the way that you need to know who they're around, how comfortable they are with saying this stuff, what setting they're in. In Bottoms, it's literally they're in one of their bedrooms. I think it's in Josie's bedroom, and it's just them chatting to each other. So it's a very kind of intimate location. There's no risk of them being overheard or anything. In Heartstopper, it's a little bit different as it's like at school and it's at the picnic tables, but at the same time, them talking about it does not affect Elle herself because she's no longer in that setting. So it is important to remember the context of this option and that you should not reduce your queer characters to their sexuality. Going back to our allegory, it's important to remember that when your character is introduced to your audience, when they present themselves in the storyline, they need to feel a certain amount of comfort. This is a place that they can be themselves, and introducing them to your audience in a place where they feel safe is a great way for this option to unfold. It really shows them with their walls down, and we can learn more about who they are when they don't have to guard who they are. Yeah, that is what it is. Now, the questions I have for this section are, what makes your character feel safest in their identity or the people around them? Does this disclosure tell the audience something about their character? And lastly, who are they talking to and what does this person do to make them feel safe? Lastly, we are going to move on to option number 3, which I am calling the slow and steady. This is an introduction that is a little bit controversial, I feel, because it kind of doesn't worry about introducing a character's sexuality at first. This is a kind of story that deals more with the struggle of coming out and disclosing this personal identity. I'm going to use an example of this that I've brought up a few times before, which is the story Maurice, which is a novel written by E.M. Forrester and a movie starring Hugh Grant. This story really covers a lot of the struggle of upper class young men in the 1920s. I think I might have gotten that wrong. But in the introduction that we get of our character Maurice, he is a young man. I think he's like 12, and we follow him as he's having a conversation with his headmaster, and it's literally like a conversation about sex, and there's all this like confusion. I've recently read like the first chapter of Maurice the book, and it's very like word for word how they adapted it in the movie. And in the book itself, there is a line at the end of the first chapter where Maurice like looks back at his headmaster or his like head teacher, I don't know, one of the teachers who was giving him this sex talk, and his internal monologue literally says, "You taught me nothing." And this is really poignant, I found, because there is so much emotion and turmoil throughout the story of Maurice. And the introduction of his sexuality, or of him as a character, is all about the struggle against the confines of society. And so having an authority figure tell him that he's going to get married, tell him that this is going to happen and how it's going to happen, and him just resolving, "You taught me nothing," is a really powerful way to introduce a character into a story like this, because we don't know that Maurice is queer yet. We don't know how he identifies. He doesn't know how he identifies because he hasn't experienced that yet. We are starting from basically ground zero, and the story builds up who he is, and he gets to explore his identity and his feelings throughout the story. So the slow and steady method really allows your character to have more growth throughout the story. We're not jumping in at like level 4, we're going in at level 0. We've got nothing, we've not figured anything out yet. We're just following along on the journey as this character learns about themselves. Now, there is a big difference between going slow and steady and queerbaiting. Main difference being the character is actually queer. So there's that. But there is an importance of the intention and the way that your characters move through the world. The way that their story is treated, the way that their identity is treated is not shut down at any point. So there is a lot of emotional work that goes into the slow and steady method. Using the words gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. is important in media, but it is also equally important to remember maybe your character isn't comfortable with that yet. Maybe in the case of Maurice, it's not a historical context where they would use that word. There are so many ways that the words wouldn't show up in that context. And so taking into account historical accuracy, taking into account character comfort, it is completely understandable why that wouldn't happen. It is so important to take into consideration your character's struggle, what they're dealing with, and the slow and steady method is a great way to build up emotional connection with your audience. It is a really great way to prolong the struggle and build that bond between your character and the audience members. Now, for the 3 questions that you can ask yourself if you want to do the slow and steady method. What struggle is your character going through that keeps them from revealing their sexuality? Are there hints that you can give to their sexuality without actually saying the words? And lastly, how does their introduction illustrate the struggle they will go through throughout the rest of the story? Okay, now let's summarize what we went over today. We have the already taken method, we have the right out of the gate, and the slow and steady method. Leave down in the comments what method you are thinking of using and what story you are writing right now. That is all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you are interested. Let us build our little community of queer writers. And yeah, share this with anyone you think would find it useful. Let's write some queer stories. And I'll catch you guys next week with another video. Bye.